Hi, and welcome back to Just Another Stitch. For those that don't know me, my name is Connie, and if you're new to my channel, I'd like to welcome you. Well, today we're going to be reading a mystery book, and the book is called The Circular Staircase by Mary Roberts Rinehart. And I'm going to read one chapter every Wednesday until we finish the book. And some of y'all may have noticed that I actually had uploaded chapter one last night, but I noticed that there were some hiccups with the streaming. So I'm going to go ahead and try to stream it again today. And hopefully, there's not going to be any hiccups today. So, chapter one is called I Take a Country House. This is a story of how a middle aged spinster lost her mind, deserted her domestic gods in the city, took a furnished house for the summers out of town, and found herself involved in one of those mysterious crimes that keep our newspapers and detective agencies happy and prosperous. For 20 years, I had been perfectly comfortable. For 20 years, I had the window boxes filled in the spring, the carpets lifted, the awnings put up, and the furniture covered with brown linen. For as many summers I had said goodbye to my friends, and after watching their perspiring hygeria, had settled down to a delicious quiet in town, where the mail comes 3 times a day and the water supply does not depend on a tank on the roof. And then the madness seized me when I look back over the months I spent at Sunnyside. I wonder that I survived at all. As it is, I show the wear and tear of my hiring experiences. I have turned very gray. Liddy reminded me of it only yesterday by saying that a little bluing in the rinse water would make my hair silvery instead of a yellowish white. I hate to be reminded of unpleasant things, and I snapped her off. No, I said shortly, I'm not going to use bluing at my time of life, or starch either. Liddy's nerves are gone, she says, since that awful summer, but she has enough left, goodness knows. And when she begins to go around with a lump in her throat, all I have to do is to threaten to return to Sunnydale, and she is frightened into a semblance of cheerfulness, from which you may judge that the summer there was anything but a success. The newspaper accounts have been so garbled and incomplete. One of them mentioned me but once, and then only as a tenant at the time the thing happened, that I feel it was due to tell what I know. Mr. Jameson, the detective, said himself he never could have done without me, although he gave me little enough credit in print. I shall have to go back several years, 13 to be exact, to start my story. At that time, my brother died, leaving me his 2 children. Hosley was 11 then, and Gertrude was 7. All the responsibilities of maternity were thrust upon me suddenly. To perfect the profession of motherhood requires precisely as many years as a child has lived, like the man who started to carry the calf and ended by walking along with the bull on his shoulders. However, I did the best I could. When Gertrude got past the hair ribbon age and Hasley asked for a scarf pin and put on long trousers and a wonderful help that was to the darning, I sent them away to good schools. After that, my responsibility was chiefly postal, with 3 months every summer in which to replenish their wardrobes, look over their list of acquaintances, and generally to take my foster motherhood out of its 9 months retirement in Camphor. I missed the summers with them. When somewhat later at boarding school and college, the children spent much of their vacations with friends. Gradually, I found that my name signed to a check was even more welcome than when signed to a letter, though I wrote them at stated intervals. But when Housley had finished his electrical course and Gertrude her boarding school, and both came home to stay, things were suddenly changed. The winter Gertrude came out was nothing but a succession of sitting up late at night to bring her home from things, taking her to the dressmaker's between naps the next day, and discouraging ineligible youths with either more money than brains or more brains than money. Although I acquired a great many things to say lingerie for undergarments, frocks and gowns instead of dresses, and that beardless sophomores are not college boys, but college men. Hosley required less personal supervision, and as they both got their mother's fortune that winter, my responsibility became purely moral. Hosley bought a car, of course, and I learned how to tie over my bonnet a gray baize veil, and after a time never to stop to look at the dogs one has run down. People are apt to be so unpleasant about their dogs. The additions to my education made me a properly equipped maiden aunt, and by spring I was quite tractable. So when Hosley suggested camping in the Adirondacks and Gertrude wanted Bore Harbor, we compromised on a good country home with links near, within motor distance of town and telephone distance of the doctor. That was how we went to Sunnydale. We went out to inspect the property, and it seemed to deserve its name. Its cheerful appearance gave no indication whatsoever of anything out of the ordinary. Only one thing seemed unusual to me. The housekeeper, who had been left in charge, had moved from the house to the gardener's lodge a few days before. As the lodge was far enough away from the house, it seemed to me that either fire or thieves could complete their work of destruction undisturbed. The property was an extensive one, the house on the top of a hill, which sloped away in great stretches of green lawn and clipped hedges to the road. And across the valley, perhaps a couple of miles away, was the Greenwood Clubhouse. Gertrude and Hosley were infatuated. Why, it's everything you want, Hosley said. View, air, good water, and good roads. As for the house, it's big enough for a hospital if it has a Queen Anne front and a Mary Ann back. Which was ridiculous. It was pure Elizabethan. Of course we took the place. It was not my ideal of comfort being much too large and sufficiently isolated to make the servant question serious. But I gave myself credit for this. Whatever has happened since, I never blamed Hosley and Gertrude for taking me there. And another thing, if the series of catastrophes there did nothing else, it taught me one thing, that somehow, somewhere, from perhaps a half-civilized ancestor who wore a sheepskin garment and trailed his food or his prey, I have in me the instinct of the chase. Were I a man, I should be a trapper of criminals, trailing them as relentlessly as no doubt my sheepskin ancestor did his wild boar. But being an unmarried woman with the handicap of my sex, my first acquaintance with crime will probably be my last. Indeed, it came near enough to being my last acquaintance with anything. The property was owned by Paul Armstrong, the president of the Traders Bank, who at the time we took the house was in the West with his wife and daughter, and a Dr. Walker, the Armstrong family physician. Hosley knew Louise Armstrong, had been rather attentive to her the winter before, but as Hosley was always attentive to somebody, I had not thought of it seriously, although she was a charming girl. I knew of Mr. Armstrong only through his connection with the bank, where the children's money was largely invested, and through an ugly story about the son, Arnold Armstrong, who was reported to have forged his father's name for a considerable amount to some bank paper. However, the story had no interest for me. I cleared Hosley and Gertrude away to a house party and moved out to Sunnyside the 1st of May. The roads were bad, but the trees were in leaf, and there were still tulips in the borders around the house. The arbutus was fragrant in the woods under the dead leaves, and on the way from the station, a short mile, while the car stuck in mud, I found a bank showered with tiny forget-me-nots. The birds, don't ask me what kind, they all look alike to me, unless they have a hallmark of some bright color. The birds were chirping in the hedges, and everything breathed of peace. Liddy, who was born and bred on a brick pavement, got a little bit down-spirited when the crickets began to chirp or scrape their legs together, or whatever it is they do at twilight. The first night passed quietly enough. I have always been grateful for that one night's peace. It shows what the country might be under favorable circumstances. Never after that night did I put my head on my pillow with any insurance how long it would be there, or on my shoulders for that matter. On the following morning, Lydia and Mrs. Ralston, my own housekeeper, had a difference of opinion, and Mrs. Ralston left on the 11 train just after luncheon. Burke, the butler, was taken unexpectedly with a pain in his right side, much worse when I was within hearing distance, and by afternoon he was started citywide. That night, the cook's sister had a baby. The cook, seeing indecision in my face, made it twins on second thought. And to be short, by noon the next day, the household staff was down to Liddy and myself. And this in a house with 22 rooms and 5 baths. Liddy wanted to go back to the city at once, but the milk boy said that Thomas Johnson, the Armstrongs' colored butler, was working as a waiter at the Greenwood Club and might come back. I have the usual scruples about forcing people's servants away, but few of us have any conscience regarding institutions or corporations. Witness the way we beat railroads and the streetcar companies when we can. So I called up the club, and about 8 o'clock, Thomas Johnson came to see me. Poor Thomas. Well, it ended by my engaging Thomas on the spot at outrageous wages and with permission to sleep in the gardener's lodge. Empty since the house was rented. The old man, he was white-haired and a little stooped, but with an immense idea of his personal dignity, gave me his reasons hesitantly. "I ain't saying nothing, Miss Eunice," he said, with his hands on the doorknob, "but there's been going-ons here this last few months as ain't natural. T'ain't one thing and t'ain't another. It's just a door squealing here and a window closing there. But when doors and windows get to churning, cutting up capers, and there's nobody hot nigh 'em, it's time Thomas Jefferson. I'm sorry, it's time Thomas Johnson sleeps somewhere else." Liddy, who seemed to be never more than 10 feet away from me that night, and was afraid of her shadow in that great barn of a place, screamed a little, and turned a yellow-green. But I am not easily alarmed. It was entirely in vain. I represented to Thomas that we were alone and that we would have to stay in the house that night. He was politely firm, but he would come over early in the next morning, and if I gave him a key, he would come in time to get some sort of breakfast. I stood on the huge veranda and watched him shuffle along during the shadowy drive, with mingled feelings, irritation at his cowardice, and thankfulness at getting him at all. I am not ashamed to say that I double locked the hall door when I went in. "You can lock up the rest of the house and go to bed, Liddy," I said severely. "You give me the creeps standing there. A woman of your age ought to have better sense." It usually braces Liddy to mention her age. She owns to 40, which is absurd. Her mother cooked for my grandfather, and Liddy must be at least as old as I. But that night she refused to brace. "You're not going to ask me to lock up, Miss Rachel," she quavered. "Well, there's a dozen French windows in the drawing room and the billiard room wing, and everyone opens on a porch. And Mary Ann said that last night there was a man standing by the stable when she locked the kitchen door." "Mary Ann was a fool," I said sternly. "If there had been a man there, she would have had him in the kitchen and been feeding him what was left from dinner inside of an hour from force of habit. Now don't be ridiculous. Lock up the house and go to bed. I am going to read." But Liddy set her lips tight and stood still. "I'm not going to bed," she said. "I'm going to pack up, and tomorrow I am going to leave." "You'll do nothing of the sort," I snapped. Liddy and I often desired to part company, but never at the same time. "If you are afraid, I will go with you, but for goodness sake, don't try to hide behind me." The house was a typical summer residence on an extensive scale. Wherever possible on the first floor, the architect had done away with partitions, using arches and columns instead. The effect was cool and spacious, but scarcely cozy. As Liddy and I went from one window to another, our voices echoed back at us uncomfortably. There was plenty of light. The electric plant down in the village supplied us, but there were long vistas of polished floor and mirrors which reflected us from unexpected corners, until I felt some of Liddy's foolishness communicate itself to me. The house was a rectangle in general form, with the main entrance in the center of the long side. The brick paved entry opened into a short hall to the right of which, separated only by a row of pillars, was a huge living room. Beyond that was the drawing room, and in the end the billiard room. Off the billiard room, in the extreme right wing, was a den or cord room, with a small hall opening on the east veranda, and from there went up a narrow circular staircase. Hasley had pointed it out with delight. "Just look, Aunt Rachel," he said with a flourish. "The architect that put up this joint was wise to a few things. Arnold Armstrong and his friends could sit here and play chords all night and stumble up to bed in the early morning without having the family send in a police call." Liddy and I got as far as the chord room and turned on all the lights. I tried the small entry door there, which opened on the veranda, and examined the windows. Everything was secure, and Liddy, a little less nervous now, had just pointed out to me the disgraceful, dusty condition of the hardwood floor, when suddenly the lights went out. We waited a moment. I think Liddy was stunned with fright, or she would have screamed, and then I clutched her by the arm and pointed to one of the windows opening on the porch. The sudden change threw the window into relief, an oblong of grayish light, and showed us a figure standing close, peering in. As I looked, it darted across the veranda and out of sight in the darkness. So that is the end of chapter 1. And next week, we'll be getting into chapter 2. So I hope you enjoyed today's reading. And I hope you're having a fabulous yarny day. Be the light and bye.